the country could change for better or for worse. To help me go through all of that, I have Steve Hilton. Steve, thank you so much for joining me.
Of course, great pleasure to be with you again.
So I want to go through a couple of big stories. One of them actually caught me off guard. Let me show this on my screen really quickly. So this is from The Atlantic.
Mm-hmm.
They literally put out an article: to save democracy, Kamala Harris may need to steal an election. What is this about? What are your thoughts on this? I mean, this is coming from a group that says we have to subvert democracy in order to save democracy, but they've kind of already done that when they kicked Joe Biden out of office, installed Kamala Harris with no votes, no primaries, no nothing. What are your thoughts on this Atlantic stuff?
Well, I haven't seen that specific story. What is the actual precise recommendation in the story?
So the recommendation is that they should do everything that they can, because Republicans may be setting up another January 6th situation. So basically it comes down to them saying that they'll do whatever it takes in order to avoid another January 6th.
So in terms of stealing an election, so that's very explicit in that headline. And so what they mean by that, I guess, TBD. But the thing that I think it illustrates is the total, lack of self-awareness from these people who constantly lecture us about how, it's almost the central argument now when you listen to them, and whether that's the Democrat politicians or their media stooges or the donors, especially a lot of the wealthy donors who are backing them. They say, well, it's because we have to protect democracy, we have to save democracy, and all the rest of it. And they don't realize how ridiculous they sound when all the time they are the ones that are constantly undermining democracy. I'll just give you one recent example from here in California. You have a city, Huntington Beach, one of our great cities here in California, that back in March, through a voter initiative, passed voter ID, right? They said, for our elections here, we want voter ID. And the voters voted for voter ID. So guess what? The next day, practically, Gavin Newsom and Rob Bonta, the state attorney general, sue Huntington Beach, say, you can't do that. How dare you vote for something that we don't agree with? And now they've actually got their people in the legislature to pass a law banning voter ID anywhere else in California. So these are the people who lecture us about our democracy. And you can go through the list of things that they do. I mean, the endless suppression of speech that they don't like, the censorship, the lawfare, they constantly accuse Trump, for example, of weaponizing the justice system to go, threatening to weaponize the justice system to go after his political opponents. You see them doing that right now in the wake of an interview he recently gave. Who's the one who's actually done that? The Democrats. And exactly as you say, completely abandoning any pretense at democracy in the way that they've installed their presidential candidate and so on. We literally spend the whole time giving examples of how they are the ones literally undermining democracy before our very eyes. And so the level of, I don't know what, we use the term projection, it's staggering, actually. But what's really interesting about that Atlantic headline that you showed is that at least they're being explicit about it. They're not pretending anymore. It's like, yeah, okay, whatever. And again, I guess all of this is really an offshoot of Trump derangement syndrome, which has become a cliche to use that term.
Yeah.
But it really, really does describe what's been going on and help explain what's been going on, which is that they've convinced themselves that this man, Donald Trump, is such a unique threat to whatever it is that they hold dear that any means necessary can be used in order to stop him. But it's just hilarious that in so doing, they just make themselves look like such fools and hypocrites.
Yeah, I knew that Gavin Newsom had passed a law for no voter ID. I didn't realize that came as backlash to voters voting to have voter ID. Like that's news to me. I didn't know that. That's amazing.
Well, it's symptomatic. If you want to sort of dive into it, this is, and actually California is instructive because, they arrogantly brag about how California is, there's a phrase that he uses, and Kamala Harris as well, a model for the nation. Kamala used the phrase, a role model for what can be done across the country. So we need to pay attention to what they're doing in California. And actually, it wasn't just that, where they overturned an election. I mean, there's no other way of describing it. They overturned an election, and then tried to insist that it doesn't happen anywhere else because they don't like the result. In the same, the same cycle, there's another ballot initiative which had been qualified for the ballot by citizens through the prescribed constitutional process. It was called the Taxpayer Protection and Government Accountability Act. And the whole point of it was, as its name suggests, to maintain long-standing, centuries old, more than a century old protections against taxes being raised without limit in California. So this ballot initiative was qualified for the ballot. So guess what they do? They sue, and they send it to the California Supreme Court, and the California Supreme Court, which is basically controlled by the legislature. I mean, most of the members are appointed by Democrats. Look at the outrage we get nationally when they constantly talk about Trump's hand-picked justices on the Supreme Court. It's a 6-3 conservative majority, and they're constantly saying the court's illegitimate, and they need court packing and all this kind of stuff. In California, it's 6-1 Democrat appointees. It's completely dominated, and there's much more of a cozy relationship between the politicians and the court because of all sorts of things like setting their budget and whatever. And so this time they take this ballot initiative that's qualified, and they send it to they do a lawsuit. It goes to the California Supreme Court that preemptively takes it off the ballot before the voters have had a chance to weigh in on it, totally overturning their own precedent. They say, often these ballot initiatives are challenged in the courts, and they have a long-standing precedent, which is we'll weigh in after the voters. And part of the reason for that is pragmatic, which is, well, if it goes down, if it's defeated, then we don't need to rule because it's moot. So they threw that out the window because the politicians told them, we really don't want this one to be voted on. So all these things, this incredible arrogance that comes with their sense that we're right, they're wrong, anything we do is justified. It really is exemplified in the way that you have basically a supermajority in the legislature in California. You've got Democrats controlling all the statewide offices, and they behave in this totally authoritarian, totalitarian manner, which is we got to control everything. The courts, the media, the legislature, the executive branch, the bureaucracy, the agencies, all of it under our control. And any challenge to it of any kind from anywhere needs to be snuffed out.
Yeah. You brought up a good point, Steve. The language, steal an election, it is pretty inflammatory language, yes. Especially where over 50% of the country worries that we don't have fair elections anymore. And 100% of MAGA voters worry that we don't have fair elections. And then they come out with things like this and say, Kamala Harris may need to steal the election. I just think it's very dangerous to put things out like that. But maybe that was the point in order to inflame the reader base.
I'm sure. But I think that they don't realize. Actually, I come back to this phrase, this lack of self-awareness. They don't even realize, because they spend their entire time in this bubble where everyone agrees with them, and they hang out in the same social circles, whether that's in New York or in DC or wherever, and there's no challenge. Everyone they know thinks like this. Everyone they know thinks, or has persuaded themselves that, imbibed the propaganda or whatever you want to call it, that Trump is this unique threat to democracy. So that they don't even realize, as they're saying it, how ridiculous they sound.
Yeah. I mean, he is, he's a tough one because he is not a politician. He does not see it the same way that the majority of people who have been in Washington, D.C. for many, many cycles see it. And he's anti-war. He's very pro-America. He's very pro-jobs. So I just think that he is not what they want to be tangoing with. But speaking of Trump, last week I reported from Las Vegas that he had set a new record among the Polymarket betting website. He was up 10 points over Kamala Harris, that people putting down money believe that he will win the presidential election. This morning, they announced that has risen to 16 points. I mean, this is a massive spread. and polling is getting harder and harder to get accurate information from. Do you think that that is indicative of where the nation might actually be going? Are we leaning more towards Trump as
Yes.
inflation continues, immigration continues?
Yeah. I think very much so. It feels to me very much as if the election momentum is going Trump's way. The wind is in his sails, as it were. And that's been true for the last week or 10 days. And I think there are two things that explain it. First of all, is his consistency, which, in all my years being involved in elections, one way or another, either running them or reporting on them, commenting on them, it seems to me that one of the most important qualities that people are looking for in a leader is strength, and just staying the course and being solid and strong and doing your thing and just keeping going, right? When everything else is, when you're being attacked and so on, that conveys a sense of strength and reliability, which I think people really value in a leader over and above the positions on specific issues. So I think that the fact that he's just still there, keeping going, doing his thing, doing the rallies, the same Trump, I think that just that sheer consistency is very attractive to people. On the specific issues, I think that you're right. You've still got the, anyone that you speak to directly, or the news companies speak to, or the polling companies, whatever, it's all the same thing, which is that they've been really hurt by this inflation. And it's just become something that is really, front of mind for people, because even though the rate of increase may be coming down, the actual level is still much, much higher. And so daily life is a nightmare for a lot of people because of these elevated costs. And so it's not coming down. The rate of increase is coming down, but the problem isn't going away. And so I think that those substantive things have not changed, and they're all in Trump's favor. The actual policy substance on inflation, on the economy, on the border. I mean, you go through the list, and internationally, where you see the chaos and danger that's in the world unleashed by American weakness under Biden and Harris. So the substantive policy stuff is still very negative for them. But I think the real thing that has changed in terms of the mood, the biggest change, is really the collapse of Kamala Harris as a serious and credible presidential candidate. I mean, there's no other way to describe it. I mean, she had that extraordinary sugar high where she'd been completely puffed up by the media in the weeks running up to the convention and then during the convention, and it's just completely gone. And the more that she does, the more people realize her inadequacy. And it just takes you right back to her first presidential campaign, where she had an amazing launch. Even Trump commented on how, the very impressive launch and so on. And she kind of got away with it for a little bit. And then during the course of that first year of campaigning, she totally collapsed. And the only question is, why did Democrats think it would be any different this time? Nothing's changed, except in the intervening period, she's shown that as vice president, she was a flop as well. So why did anyone think it would be any different with Kamala Harris?
Yeah, I think you make a really good point. They've been doing this run her from the basement strategy, and she had this sugar high. Everyone was excited. Then they realized that they were losing. Yes. Now they've been doing all of these interviews and podcasts, and people are actually getting to hear from her, and they're realizing she's cotton candy. It tastes sweet, but it dissolves. There's no policy. People are literally tuning in going, how are you going to make my life more affordable? Yes. How are you going to make my children's life better? How are you going to make me feel safe? How are we going to avoid World War III? How do we stop being overrun with illegal immigrants? She has no answer for any of that.
No.
And the more she goes out, the more people, I think, are realizing that.
Yes, the worse it is. And she can't. So it reminds the whole thing that they're in a real dilemma, because what do you do? Right. So for all that time, they say, well, we're not going to let her do interviews because it's a disaster when she does interviews. And then that clearly was failing. Oh, wow, we got to put her out there and do interviews. Oh, Christ, that's it. It's really, now we know why we didn't want her to do interviews. But what do? You're stuck with it. It reminds me of that story that my wife has told a few times, where, it's the wife or the girlfriend or whatever trying on a dress before a party. And she's can't decide between two dresses. And she puts on a dress and shows the partner, what do you think of this? He says, oh, no, that's terrible. And so she puts the second one on. And he says, yeah, I think I prefer the first one.
Yeah.
It's just like that, which is like, she's terrible. She was a disaster when she wasn't doing the interviews, and then they do the interviews and say, you know what, go back to not doing interviews because it's better than this. And by the way, it's this extraordinary insult. Again, going back to our point about democracy, what an insult to the American people that she still has not done a press conference. It's absolutely astonishing. Not one. An actual press conference, standing there and taking any questions and in an open manner. Not happened. I mean,
Yeah.
that is unbelievably insulting to the American people and to the whole idea of how we should be running things in a democracy. So it's just laughable that these people preach about protecting our democracy. That's another example, frankly, of how they're undermining it.
Yeah. I'll share two examples with you and the audience, but Bloomberg invited Donald Trump and Kamala Harris to sit down with the editor-in-chief over at the Economic Club of Chicago. Trump showed up. They asked very difficult questions. I felt like he held his own. He had a couple of funny, good jokes where he, was digging at the host. But then this one right here, let me pull this up. And we'll look at this together. This one is a real snub. And this comes from
Time. Yeah, very
Time magazine, where literally the cover of their magazine is Harris declined repeated requests for an interview for this story. In contrast, Trump talked about his policy vision with a Time reporter for 90 minutes across 2 interviews. Biden spoke to Time at similar lengths before dropping out of the race. I mean, so they're now coming out and publicly shaming her, saying, listen, if you can't even handle questions from Time magazine, how are you going to be the commander-in-chief of the U.S. military? How are you going to run one of the biggest economies in the world? Your thoughts on that, Steve?
Well, first of all, it's fascinating because it's owned by a guy called Mark Benioff, who's the founder of Salesforce, massive tech company here in the Bay Area where I live, who's a massive Democrat, huge supporter of Gavin Newsom, big Democrat. And he owns it 100%. So this is him saying this. He's obviously absolutely furious. I mean, that is a completely sort of straight head-on attack on her in the most aggressive possible manner. And I just think it shows that there's, the fact that they're in this situation. I think this is the point in a campaign where I think it gets very hard. There's not a lot of time to turn around the narrative. I remember after the convention, and it was all so amazing, and Kamala did the best thing ever, and all the ridiculous overhyping of Kamala Harris. And I remember saying to friends, to people, there's still time for one more turn of the narrative before the election, for a big one, and we're in it because you see now that and it's just this classic thing that happens when there's the whiff of death about a campaign, is that everything they do, it's the bad things that are highlighted. Because actually, the truth is, in campaigns, all candidates and all whatever, they always make mistakes and there's things that go wrong, and that's just life. But when you've got this whiff of death about a campaign, it's always the negative things that are highlighted and blown up. And that's what you're getting now with Kamala Harris, where every single thing she does, there's something bad comes out of it. When's the last time she did anything that was seen as unequivocally good? Oh, she did a really great job here. No, it's all, oh, she said this embarrassing thing or that embarrassing thing, couldn't answer that question, didn't participate in this thing. And so that's the cycle they're in now. I don't know. I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but it feels very, very unlikely to me that they turn that around. I mean, you see the media, by the way, constantly trying to do that. I mean, her allies in the media. I said yesterday morning, actually, I'd try and sample everything, and for hour or so in the morning at home, we listen to NPR, and a lot of people say, how can you do that? I find it interesting. So we have NPR on when I'm making breakfast for the family, and it was amazing yesterday. It just seemed to really turn, and NPR just went on full bore Kamala Harris propaganda. I mean, just like absolutely shameless propaganda. Remember, it's supposed to be a public broadcaster, fair and balanced and impartial and whatever. And they're just, you can see they're sort of desperately trying to find something to attack Trump and not mention Kamala, because there's nothing good to say. And so And you saw it with CNN as well, the way they're covering her and what she's trying to do to reach black voters, whatever. But like the whole subtext is she's having a nightmare with all these different groups. And they sent Tim Waltz out over the weekend to show that he's so in touch with masculine values by shooting. And all it comes back are these memes of him being like Elmer Fudd, not being able to shoot the gun. And so everything they touch it falls apart right now. So I don't know. And to me, the Time magazine thing is a really good example where this is, the fact that just saying no to an interview turned into this massive issue where they put it on the cover is just symptomatic of the fact that it's all going wrong right now for the Kamala Harris campaign.
Yeah, I thought, wow, revenge is a dish best served cold.
Oh, yes.
What better way? I mean, they literally started the economic club of Chicago by saying Kamala Harris refused to be here and speak to you today. That's how they started it.
Right.
And this is not a pro-Trump club, right? And then you have Time magazine, like literally they do how many magazine covers per year and they decide to shame her.
Yeah.
It's really
amazing.
telling. Very
a Democrat donor, a massive billionaire Democrat donor doing it. And the other thing is that even when she does the easy stuff, it goes wrong. Like, she goes on The View and they're all, fawning over her and all the time. They hate Trump. Total safe space, as it were. And she makes probably the biggest single mistake of the whole campaign, where she's asked, how are you different to Biden? Or would you have done something differently to Biden? Remember, that she's trying to show she's changed. And she says, oh, actually, nothing. First of all, it looks terrible, like just sort of umming and ahhing and like as if you didn't expect that question. It's the most obvious question. And then she says, oh, nothing comes to mind. I mean, it's an unbelievable mistake.
Yeah.
And that's in a place where it was just completely softball. Same with Stephen Colbert. She goes on Stephen Colbert, assuming, I suppose, this is going to be an unalloyed triumph. All you get from that is, terrible video of her yucking it up, drinking beer, while communities in the South are being devastated by hurricanes. I mean, it's just everything she touches right now seems to fall apart.
Yeah, well, we don't want her touching America because she's already done enough damage. Last night on my daily show, Steve, I asked my listeners if they believe that Donald Trump would take action on day one to correct the border issue. I've never seen so many positive comments in the live feed.
Yeah.
And then today, Donald Trump announced he wants to hire immediately 10,000 new border agents and said that he will ask Congress for a 10% raise for these men and women, as well as a $10,000 retention bonus for staying on. This is a man that seems to really want to fix the illegal immigration situation as well as the legal immigration situation. Yeah. Do you see Kamala Harris actually doing anything as the now you can't avoid being the border czar if she becomes president?
No.
Do you see her changing anything?
No, because she's not an executive. She's not an executive. She doesn't understand how to do stuff. I mean, if you look, she keeps going on about her record. And actually, if you look into the record, it's completely the opposite of what she says. So, for example, she goes on about how she's a prosecutor. Her record in San Francisco as the district attorney was calamitous. There were 1,500 cases had to be overturned because of the sloppy practices in her department in terms of evidence and so on, right? So she's just not, and actually, I mean, you see this all the time. Just a couple of examples recently where it tells you, it kind of reveals how she would be in office. One was the $750 for flood victims, for Helene victims. And I know that there's context to that and that there was, it's not the whole story. I don't want to mislead people. It wasn't the only thing they were offering. However, if you've got any sense at all, right, that if you say that, that's what's going to, and it's the first thing you say, that's how people are going to hear it. And so she is there, but it was very revealing, not just that she made a mistake. It's like I've worked at the side of the leader of a country in 10 Downing Street in the UK many years ago. And I've seen that a huge part of the job of being in these senior positions, these leadership positions, is pushing back on stuff that's brought to you, whether that's from your advisors or the bureaucracy or wherever it comes from, whether that's things to say or things to do or proposals, whatever. A huge part of the job is having the judgment to say, no, I'm not saying that. I'm not doing that. Bring me something better. That's not good enough, right? You got to, that's a huge part of what you have to do. So any normal any sort of competent person would have seen that, and they obviously give her talking points, and she would have said, sorry, I'm not saying that. Bring me something better. But she didn't. She just trotted out there and said what was put in front of her. Another example, almost at the same time, she puts out a tweet about aid to Lebanon, about the humanitarian crisis in Lebanon. Oh, here's all these hundreds of millions of dollars we're sending to Lebanon. And again, a real leader would have said, no, we're not doing that. Or if we are doing that, we're going to give 100 times as much money to North Carolina as we are to Lebanon. If we have to give something to Lebanon, let's at least kind of get it proportionate. So, but the fact that she just goes along with this stuff tells you that she would be a hopeless chief executive. And so she would never get anything done along these lines to actually fix things. And the fact that Trump is being so precise and specific, hire the people, 10 grand hiring bonus, whatever, because he's done this kind of thing before. He knows how to do it. Plus, he's got people there now who, because he knows he needs good people who agree with him in terms of getting things done. So he's got just specifically on the border. Tom Homan is a great guy I know well, who's there with him, who'll be right in there, whether he has an official position or not, making this stuff happen because he knows how to do it. And so it's going to get done. I mean, there's no doubt in my mind that it will get done.
Yeah, I mean, you may find people from North Carolina that go become Border Patrol just because they can get a better signing bonus than $750. I'm not embarrassed to say this, but when I read her tweet about $157 million to Lebanon, I searched Lebanon, North Carolina, and then I realized, oh, she means the country over by Israel.
Wow.
I thought, oh, okay, they're finally going to do something for the American people besides $700 to Maui. And why did the people in North Carolina get $50 more than the people in Hawaii? I don't know. Just how they come up with these numbers is so bizarre.
Well, that's again, a leader should say sorry. Just be on top of this stuff. I mean, you're running that's the job. You're running the machinery of government. I mean, not, of course, literally in terms of that every single small thing you're presiding over the machinery, but you've got to set the direction. You've got to hold people accountable. You've got to lead. And a big part of leadership, as I say, is pushing back on bad stuff.
Yeah. I could see Trump saying something like, listen, we're going to open the coffers. We're going to get money in here. Nobody needs to complain or whine. It goes to American jobs. It's American electricians, Americans cleaning up for other Americans. Like, let's get this done. The messaging would have been right on, but they just—
Well, that's another thing, by the way, just in terms of the positive, the contrast of the last few days. It was just very interesting watching Trump. The first day he was there in Georgia, bringing supplies, truckloads of supplies. He makes the communications thing happen with Elon Musk and Starlink, just practical problem solving. And it reminds people of the best version of Trump, I suppose, that you could say, which is the version that really attracted people in the first place, which is, here's this guy, he's not a politician, he's a problem-solving, pragmatic business guy, he's just going to get things done. And that was really on display over all of this flood response.
Yeah, I completely agree. Okay, final question. I know you got to jump to another interview. Department of Homeland Security Alejandro Mayorkas said that Americans should condemn the rhetoric suggesting that Harris would intentionally allow individuals to illegally cross into the country. Like, why is it our job to condemn exactly what we can see with our own eyes?
I mean, it's insane.
This is right out of 1984. Ignore your eyes and ears and apologize.
I mean, he's a truly appalling figure, Mayorkas. I mean, I've been sort of on his case, all the years he's been there, and just the sort of sanctimonious, patronizing, detachment from reality. Like, what are you talking about? You've got actual problems, like real problems caused by this open borders extremism that's now affecting every community in the country pretty much. And and the issue is what Trump says about it when he tells the truth, when he's kind of accurately characterizing the problem that everyone's feeling. It's a little bit like Martha Raddatz on ABC on This Week when she's criticizing what Trump and JD Vance were saying about the violent Venezuelan gangs taking over apartment complexes in Colorado, and she's fussed up about what they say about it rather than the fact that it's happening. I mean, it's just amazing.
Yeah, it was only a few buildings that they took over the entire building, but it was only a few.
That's a devastating moment. And because it's so, people really get the reason that really kind of resonated, because everyone knows that is how they think about all of these issues. Oh, it's not, don't make such a fuss, it's just a few people. Why are you making such a fuss about all these each time there's a murder by an illegal immigrant? That's don't get it out of proportion. And then, do you remember the thing that used to most annoy me? They would say, well, it's totally unfair because immigrants commit crimes at lower rates than the domestic born population. I said, well, that's not the point. I mean, even if that's true, and by the way, I think that's being challenged now with the release of that data from the other week that we have, like, amongst the immigrant population was 600,000 plus criminals, but it's not the point, because every single one of those crimes committed by an illegal immigrant could have and should have been avoided, should have been prevented, because they shouldn't be here. And so, another way of putting it is, don't we have enough crime in America without importing it? And so it's just the kind of total out of touch elitism that diminishes these problems. Instead of saying, yeah, that's a problem, we should do something about it. So no, you're exaggerating, you're making that's not an issue. It's just so unbelievably offensive to people. I think that's what you're seeing in this election. It's just, this stuff is just like, what are you talking about? This is my life. Don't tell me inflation's not real. Don't tell me the border's secure. Don't tell me that you've done a good job internationally. I can see that it's all a disaster. So I think that's contributing to the failure to launch really effectively of any of these, different versions that they've had of Kamala Harris in this campaign. I mean, people are just saying, yeah, sorry, you're not addressing the issues that I have. You're not offering anything except endless kind of massively exaggerated criticisms of Trump. And by the way, Trump is the one that looks like he understands what my needs are and has got a solution to them.
Yes. Amen. I agree with that. Steve, I know you've got to jump. I appreciate you giving us your time today. If people want to catch your show or follow you online, where can I put some links?
Thank you very much. Well, you can follow me on X at Steve Hilton X. I had the X before it became X, by the way. That was been my handle, even on Twitter, at Steve Hilton X. And I have a weekly podcast, The Steve Hilton Show. So please do follow that on Apple, YouTube, Spotify, all the usual places.
Okay, I'll put all that down below. Thank you again. I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thanks so much.